The sky over Vera 9 turned a deep shade of crimson, the air thick with the scent of metal and dust. The ground trembled as a radioactive storm rolled in from the distant mountains, its towering clouds flashing with electric discharges. Anyone caught outside wouldn't survive for long. Darren Hayes, a human scavenger, pulled his goggles over his eyes and adjusted the thick cloak wrapped around his shoulders. His boots crunched over the barren wasteland as he hurried toward an old mining outpost, its rusted towers barely standing against the wind. "Gotta move fast," he muttered to himself. The planet was deadly, but Darren had learned how to survive. The radiation storms came suddenly, with no warning, and they could strip the flesh off bones if one wasn't careful. His shelter was only a few hundred meters away, but the storm was closing in faster than he expected. Then he saw her. A slender figure was struggling against the wind, her silver cloak whipping violently in the air. She was barely standing, her legs unsteady, as if she were about to collapse. Darren didn't stop to think. He ran toward her. "Hey, you need to move," he shouted, his voice almost lost in the roaring wind. The figure turned slightly, revealing glowing silver eyes, wide with exhaustion and fear. She looked alien, definitely not human, but Darren didn't have time to question it. She was about to fall. The wind howled like a beast, carrying sharp debris through the air. Darren didn't hesitate. He ripped off his cloak and threw it over her, shielding her from the radioactive dust. With one swift motion, he grabbed her arm and pulled her close, steadying her against his body. "Hold on to me," he ordered. The woman was weak, barely able to stand, but she clutched his jacket with trembling hands. Darren forced himself to move, dragging her with him. His legs burned as he pushed forward, the storm slamming against them like a giant's fury. The outpost was close, just a few more steps, but his muscles screamed with effort. Suddenly, a sharp gust of wind hit them, nearly knocking them off their feet. Darren tightened his grip around the woman's waist, shielding her as best as he could. "Almost there. Just keep moving," he urged. The rusted doors of the outpost loomed ahead. With a final burst of strength, Darren lunged forward, slamming his fist against the emergency panel. The doors groaned open, and he dragged the woman inside, just as the storm roared past, rattling the metal walls. Silence. For a moment, Darren just stood there, panting hard, his arms still wrapped around the stranger. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, his body aching from the effort. Then he slowly looked down at the woman. She was smaller than he expected, her delicate features framed by long silver hair that shimmered in the dim light. Her skin had a faint golden hue, and she wore what looked like royal garments, though they were torn and dirty. Darren frowned. Who was she? She blinked up at him, her glowing eyes filled with something between shock and confusion. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice soft but filled with disbelief. Darren let out a breath. "Yeah. What were you doing out there alone?" She hesitated, as if she wasn't sure how to answer. Her gaze dropped to the cloak wrapped around her shoulders, the very one Darren had used to protect her. Slowly, she looked back up at him, something strange and unreadable in her expression. Before she could speak, a warning light flickered on the wall panel. Darren turned, his stomach tightening. The storm had triggered proximity sensors. Someone, or something, was approaching. And judging by the blinking red dots on the screen, they weren't friendly. The dim emergency lights flickered inside the old mining outpost, casting long shadows on the walls. Darren Hayes took a step back from the control panel, his jaw tightening as he stared at the blinking red dots on the screen. The proximity alarm had been triggered. Something, or someone, was outside. He glanced at the alien woman wrapped in his cloak. She sat on the floor, still catching her breath, her silver hair slightly damp from the storm's moisture. Her glowing eyes flickered with uncertainty as she watched him. "Who's after you?" Darren asked, his voice low but firm. The woman hesitated. Her gaze shifted toward the sealed metal doors, the wind still howling outside. She pulled the cloak tighter around herself, as if the weight of his question made her uncomfortable. I can't say, she finally whispered. Darren narrowed his eyes. That alarm says otherwise. Somebody out there wants you bad enough to track you through a radioactive storm. You don't just end up on a wasteland planet like this by accident. She looked down, silent. Darren exhaled sharply. He didn't have time for secrets. Moving quickly, he grabbed a rusted metal crate and dragged it toward the door, reinforcing the blockade. Then he checked his plasma pistol, making sure it was fully charged. He wasn't planning to die here today. The woman finally spoke. They're hunters. Darren froze for a second, then turned to her. She swallowed hard, her fingers clutching the fabric of his cloak. They were sent to capture me. Capture? Darren frowned. Why? She hesitated again, then lifted her left wrist, revealing a small golden emblem embedded in her skin. The symbol was intricate, unlike anything Darren had seen before. It looked important. I am Princess Silvera of the Celestian Empire, she said softly. Darren blinked. Did she just say, princess? His mind raced. The Celestian Empire was one of the most powerful alien civilizations in the galaxy. They ruled over dozens of planets, their influence stretching across entire star systems. If she was telling the truth, this wasn't just some runaway refugee. This was royalty. Darren ran a hand through his dust-covered hair, muttering under his breath. Great, just great. I saved someone from a storm, and it turns out she's got an army looking for her. Silvera winced at his words. I didn't ask for your help, she said quietly. Darren let out a dry chuckle. No, but you'd be dead if I hadn't pulled you out of there. She flinched but said nothing. Darren sighed. He could see she was scared, even if she tried to hide it. He crouched down in front of her, keeping his tone calmer this time. Why are they after you? What did you do? Silvera looked up at him, her glowing silver eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. Fear, exhaustion, and something deeper. I refuse to marry the warlord my council chose for me, she whispered. Darren raised an eyebrow. Marriage. This was about marriage. The man they chose is cruel, she continued. He sees me as property. I escaped before the ceremony, but my people consider it a betrayal. Darren exhaled. So, they sent bounty hunters to drag you back. She nodded. Alive, if possible. The words hung heavy in the air. Darren understood now. This wasn't just about tradition. This was power politics. If she had refused an arranged marriage with a warlord, it meant someone had a lot to lose if she remained free. Before he could say anything else, a loud bang echoed against the metal door. Silvera gasped, her hands gripping his cloak tighter. Darren moved fast. He grabbed his pistol and pressed a finger against his lips, signaling her to stay quiet. Another bang followed, this time harder. They know we're in here, he muttered under his breath. A static-filled voice crackled through the old intercom system. Princess Silvera, a cold, male voice spoke in a thick alien accent. You cannot run forever. Open the door now, and no harm will come to the human. Silvera shivered. Darren caught the small movement. She was terrified. He leaned closer, whispering in her ear. I don't trust them. Do you? She shook her head quickly. They're lying. Darren smirked. Figured. Another bang. The door dented inward. They didn't have much time. Darren turned to the control panel, his mind working fast. There had to be another way out. His eyes landed on an old maintenance tunnel hatch on the far side of the room. Bingo, he muttered. He grabbed Silvera's hand. We're not staying here. She hesitated. But. No buts. Unless you want to be dragged back to your warlord, we move. Now. Her grip tightened in his. With one last look at the shaking door, they bolted toward the hatch. The hunters were coming, and Darren wasn't about to let them win. The metal door shuddered violently as another impact struck it. The bounty hunters were getting closer, and Darren knew they had only seconds before the door gave way. He tightened his grip on Silvera's hand and pulled her toward the maintenance hatch. Dust and rust fell as he yanked the lever with all his strength. The hatch creaked, refusing to budge. "Come on, open up," he muttered through clenched teeth. Behind them, the intercom crackled again. "You cannot run, Princess." The voice of the bounty hunter echoed through the small outpost. "You belong to the Celestian Empire. Surrender now, and the human will be spared." Silvera tensed beside him, her glowing silver eyes filled with fear. Darren turned to her. "Do you believe them?" She shook her head quickly. "No, they won't spare you. Once they have me, they'll kill anyone who helped." Darren exhaled. Figures. The door bent inward with another heavy slam. They were out of time. With one final pull, the maintenance hatch finally gave way, revealing a dark, narrow tunnel leading downward. "This way," Darren said, jumping down first. His boots hit solid ground, and he quickly turned back, reaching up to help Silvera. She hesitated only for a second before lowering herself down. As soon as she landed beside him, Darren pulled the hatch shut, plunging them into darkness. The air was damp and stale, the walls made of old, crumbling metal. The tunnel stretched ahead, disappearing into a maze of underground pathways. Darren turned on a small wrist light, casting a faint glow. "Stay close," he whispered. Silvera nodded, gripping his sleeve. They moved quickly, the distant sounds of boots stomping above them making Darren's heartbeat race. The bounty hunters were searching the outpost. He only hoped they wouldn't figure out the escape route too soon. A path to freedom, or a trap. The tunnel twisted and turned, the old pathways leading deeper beneath the wasteland. Silvera broke the silence. "Where does this lead?" Darren kept his eyes ahead. "If we're lucky, to an old supply depot outside the hunter's perimeter." "And if we're unlucky?" she asked hesitantly. He shot her a quick glance. "Straight into a dead end." Silvera swallowed hard but kept moving. Minutes passed, the tunnel stretching longer than Darren remembered. He had used these paths once before, but that was years ago. Had they collapsed since then? Silvera's face paled. "They sent seeker drones." Darren nodded grimly. "Yeah, and those things don't lose their target." The faint blue lights of the drones flickered in the distance, scanning the tunnels. They were closing in fast. Darren turned to Silvera. "Can you run?" She straightened, determination in her eyes. "Yes." "Good." Without another word, they took off down the tunnel, the blue lights growing brighter behind them. They needed to find an exit. Fast. If they didn't, they wouldn't have another chance. The tunnel walls shook slightly, dust trickling from above as Darren and Silvera ran through the dim underground passage. The seeker drones were close behind, their soft blue scanning lights flickering like hungry eyes in the darkness. Darren's boots pounded against the metal floor, his breathing controlled but tense. He could hear Silvera's lighter steps beside him, her pace quick but struggling to keep up. "They're gaining on us," she said, her voice barely above. Darren grabbed Silvera's hand and pulled her toward the elevator doors. "Help me pry these open," he shouted. Silvera pressed her hands against the gap, straining as she helped Darren force the doors apart. The scrapyard was just beyond, a massive, open wasteland of old ships and broken metal. Darren jumped out first, landing hard on a pile of debris. "Come on," he called up. Silvera didn't hesitate. She jumped down, landing beside him. Behind them, the bounty hunter recovered quickly. The elevator shook as he prepared to follow. Darren grabbed Silvera's arm and ran. "We need a ship," he said, scanning the scrapyard. "Something we can steal. Fast." Silvera pointed to a small cargo transport nearby. "There." Darren didn't question it. They sprinted toward the ship. Behind them, the bounty hunter leaped from the elevator, landing with inhuman grace. He was still coming. Darren's heart pounded. They had seconds left. As they reached the ship, Darren spotted a panel near the entrance. A lock. Of course. Silvera turned to him. Can you break it? Darren pulled a small multi-tool from his belt, his fingers moving fast. The bounty hunter was closing in. The lock flickered red. Then, green. The door slid open. Inside. Now. They jumped in, slamming the door shut just as the hunter reached them. Darren rushed to the pilot's seat, flipping switches. The engines roared to life. Outside, the bounty hunter raised his weapon. Darren hit the thrusters. The ship lifted off, fire bursting from the engines as it soared into the sky. The bounty hunter disappeared beneath them. They had escaped, for now. Darren let out a shaky breath, turning to Silvera. Well, he said, smirking despite himself. That was fun. Silvera just stared at him, then shook her head. You humans are insane. Darren grinned. You're just figuring that out now. She sighed. We're not safe yet. Darren nodded. Yeah, but we're alive. And for now, that was enough. The small cargo transport roared through the sky, breaking free from the planet's surface. The engines trembled, struggling to keep the ship stable after years of abandonment. Darren gripped the controls, his knuckles turning white. His heart still pounded from their close escape. The bounty hunter had been seconds away from catching them. Silvera sat in the co-pilot's seat, breathing heavily, her silver eyes scanning the control panels. The ship's interior was old, filled with dusty consoles and flickering lights, but it was still faster than running on foot. Darren let out a breath. Well, that was a mess. Silvera shot him a look. That's an understatement. He smirked. You're welcome, by the way. She sighed, looking out the window as the scrapyard grew smaller beneath them. They had escaped, for now, but she knew it wouldn't last. The bounty hunter, she said, voice quiet. He's not going to stop. Darren nodded. Yeah, I figured. A new problem. The ship shook slightly, a warning light flashing on the dashboard. Darren frowned and tapped the screen. Oh. Silvera stiffened. What? Darren sighed. Looks like the fuel cells are low. This ship wasn't meant for long flights. Her heart sank. How low? Darren glanced at the readings. We have enough to reach orbit, maybe. But if we don't find a place to land soon, we're gonna be floating in space with no power. Silvera clenched her fists. Then we need a destination. Darren thought for a moment. The system maps were outdated, but he had some knowledge of the region. There's an old trading outpost a few hours away, he said. It's abandoned now, but smugglers sometimes stop there. Silvera hesitated. And if the bounty hunters find us there? Darren shrugged. Then we run. Again. She exhaled slowly. Fine. Set the course. Darren punched in the coordinates, and the ship's navigation system calculated the route. The engines hummed, adjusting their trajectory. The moment of peace didn't last long. A sharp beeping sound echoed through the cockpit. Silvera's fingers tightened on the armrest. What now? Darren's eyes narrowed at the radar screen. Unidentified ship approaching, the system warned. Darren cursed under his breath. A dark shape appeared on the scanner, a pursuer-class vessel. Small, fast, built for hunting down targets. The bounty hunter already found another ship. Silvera asked in disbelief. Darren's jaw clenched. Looks like it. The incoming ship sent out a transmission. The speakers crackled, and a familiar deep voice filled the cockpit. You can't escape me, princess. Silvera shivered. The bounty hunter. Darren smirked. Oh yeah. Watch us. He slammed the thrusters to full power. The transport ship lurched forward, speeding toward the trading outpost. The chase in space. The bounty hunter's ship moved fast, closing the distance with ease. Energy weapons powered up, glowing red on the sensors. Darren gripped the controls, dodging left just as a blast of plasma streaked past the ship. Silvera gasped. He's going to shoot us down. Not if I can help it, Darren muttered. He spun the ship sideways, flying dangerously close to an asteroid field. Silvera's eyes widened. "You're not actually." "Trust me," Darren cut in, weaving through the floating rocks. The ship's hull groaned, scraping past a large asteroid. The bounty hunter followed, his ship much more agile, dodging debris with ease. A new alarm blared in the cockpit. Silvera checked the readings. "Shields at 40%. We can't take much more of this." Darren clenched his teeth. "Think, Hayes. Think." He spotted a massive asteroid ahead, its surface covered in metallic wreckage. A plan formed in his mind. "I'm going to loop around that asteroid and cut the thrusters," he said quickly. Silvera stared at him. "That's insane." "Yeah," Darren grinned, "but it might work." She exhaled sharply. "Fine. Do it." Darren pushed the ship forward, heading straight for the asteroid. The bounty hunter followed. At the last second, Darren cut the thrusters and flipped the ship, using the asteroid's gravity to pull them around to the other side. The bounty hunter's ship rushed forward, too fast. Before he could react, the hunter's ship clipped a jagged piece of wreckage, spinning out of control. Darren didn't wait to see what happened next. He hit the thrusters again, breaking free of the asteroid field. Silvera watched the scanners. The bounty hunter's ship wasn't following. She turned to Darren, eyes wide. "Did we win?" Darren chuckled. "Let's just say we bought ourselves some time." She shook her head, amazed. "You humans are reckless." Darren smirked. "You're welcome." A moment of quiet. As the trading outpost came into view, Darren finally relaxed. For the first time in what felt like forever, they weren't being chased. Silvera let out a long breath. "Thank you, Darren." He glanced at her. "For what?" "For not giving up." Darren chuckled. "Not my style." The ship approached the outpost, its landing lights blinking. For now, they had a chance to rest. But Darren knew. The bounty hunter wouldn't stop until he had Silvera back. And next time, he wouldn't be so easy to escape. The trading outpost loomed ahead, its metallic structure floating above the abandoned asteroid belt. The place looked old, rusted platforms, flickering lights, and half-broken docking stations. But it was quiet. And right now, quiet was good. Darren guided the ship in carefully, landing on one of the few functioning docks. The engines hissed as they powered down. Silvera let out a slow breath beside him. "We made it." Darren smirked. "Barely." He leaned back in the pilot's seat, finally allowing himself a moment to breathe. The chase had drained them both, but they weren't safe yet. Silvera's silver eyes scanned the docking bay. "This place, no one is here." Darren nodded. "Smugglers use it sometimes, but it's been abandoned for years." Silvera hesitated. "Then why stop here?" Darren gave her a sideways glance. "Because I need time to fix this ship. And you need to figure out your next move." A difficult choice. They stepped out of the ship, their boots echoing against the steel floor of the outpost. Dust swirled in the air, and flickering lights cast strange shadows along the walls. Silvera wrapped Darren's cloak tightly around her shoulders, hiding her royal markings. She looked at him carefully. "You think the bounty hunter is still out there?" Darren shrugged. "Probably. But that last trick we pulled should buy us a few hours." Silvera's fingers tightened around the fabric of the cloak. "Darren," she started, then hesitated. He raised an eyebrow. "What?" She took a slow breath. "You've done more for me than anyone else ever has, but you don't have to keep risking your life. This is my fight." Darren crossed his arms. "You think I'm just gonna walk away now?" Silvera lowered her gaze. "It's not fair to you." Darren exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I didn't sign up for this, but here we are. And I'm not gonna let some bounty hunter drag you back to a life you don't want." She looked up at him, her silver eyes soft with gratitude. "You're different, Darren." He chuckled. "Yeah, people keep telling me that." She smiled, But the moment was broken by a loud beep from Darren's wrist communicator. The incoming threat. Darren frowned and checked the device. The radar scan showed a ship approaching fast. His stomach dropped. Silvera noticed his expression. "What is it?" He sighed. "The bounty hunter." Her eyes widened. "Already?" Darren nodded. "He's persistent. I'll give him that." Silvera's hands curled into fists. "We need a plan." Darren thought quickly. The outpost had a few escape routes, but none were easy. They had one last chance to turn the fight in their favor. He pointed to a cargo lift leading to the upper docking bay. "There's an old comms relay up there. If we can activate it, we can send out a distress signal." Silvera's eyes widened. "To my people?" Darren nodded. "Your kingdom's looking for you, right? Time to let them know where you are." The final stand. They ran toward the lift, but before they could reach it, a loud crash shook the outpost. Darren turned sharply. The bounty hunter had landed. The metal doors hissed open, revealing the tall, armored figure stepping out of his sleek, black ship. His yellow visor glowed as he scanned the docking bay. "Princess Silvera," his voice echoed. "It's over." Darren gritted his teeth and stepped in front of Silvera. "You really don't give up, do you?" The bounty hunter tilted his head slightly. "A human challenging me. Foolish." Darren smirked. "Yeah, try me." The bounty hunter moved fast. Too fast. Darren barely dodged the first strike, rolling to the side as the hunter's fist slammed into the wall, leaving a deep dent. Silvera ran toward the comms relay, fingers flying over the control panel. "Almost there," she whispered. Darren had no time to think. He just reacted. He grabbed a metal pipe from the ground and swung it at the hunter's leg joints, trying to slow him down. The hunter staggered slightly, but not for long. He turned back to Darren with cold fury. "You fight well," the hunter admitted, "but you're outmatched." Darren grinned, despite the pain in his arms. "Maybe." The hunter lunged again, but this time, Darren was ready. He grabbed a small explosive charge from his belt, the last one he had, and threw it at the hunter's feet. Boom! The explosion sent the hunter flying backward, his armor sparking from the impact. Darren wasted no time. "Silvera. Now." She slammed the final command on the panel. The distress beacon activated. A glowing message flashed across the screen. "Transmission sent. CELE Stadien, Royal Guard incoming." The bounty hunter recovered, but it was too late. The sound of multiple ships entering the atmosphere filled the air. Darren smirked. "Looks like your ride's here." The bounty hunter growled, stepping back. He wasn't stupid. He knew when a fight was lost. With one final glare, he turned and retreated to his ship, taking off into the sky. A new beginning. Moments later, Celestian Royal Guard ships landed. Armored soldiers stepped out, weapons raised, but when they saw Silvera, their expressions softened. "My lady," one of them said, kneeling before her. Silvera took a deep breath. "I need to speak with my father." Immediately, Darren watched as she stood tall, her royal presence undeniable now. She turned back to him, her expression unreadable. "You should come with me." Darren hesitated. "I'm not exactly royal material." She smiled softly. "You saved my life, Darren." "That means you're more than that." Darren exhaled, then shrugged. "All right, why not?" As they stepped onto the royal ship, Silvera whispered, "I owe you everything." Darren chuckled. "Just promise me one thing." "What?" He smirked. "No more bounty hunters." She laughed. "I'll try." The ship rose into the sky, leaving the outpost behind. Darren had no idea what awaited him next. But one thing was certain. His life had changed forever.